Pastor Philip Battles, New Faith Holiness Church. Everyone, please silence your phone, and if you so choose, please stand and remain standing for the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you.
Good evening. Thanks for having me here. And I want to give special thanks to the mayor, thank you, and to Reverend Robinson, the city of Beaumont, the fire department, the councilman. Thank you for coming out with me on last Saturday. We had a wonderful day and our community fun day. We want to thank you. Let us bow our head in prayer, please. Gracious Father, we come today thanking you for this meeting today. Ask that, my Father, that you give us good guidance, good wisdom, and good understanding. Ask that you bless each one of us here today, my Father. Bless our leaders today, my Father. Bless our council member. Bless our mayor, our leaders, and our guidance. We actually want to say thank you for all that you've done. Most of all, my Father, we have a special request today. As our kids go back to another year of schooling, we ask that you look up on them, guide them, lead them, my Father. I ask that you build a fence around them. Take care of them, my Father. Look up on our school district, my Father. God, we want to say thank you for all that you've done. In your Son, Jesus' name, we pray. Amen and amen.
Pledge allegiance. May I have roll call, please?
Mayor West.
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem Turner, absent. Councilmember Durio.
Present.
Councilmember Getz.
Present.
Councilmember Felshaw.
Present.
Councilmember Samuel, absent. And Councilmember Neal, absent.
Today we have one presentation from the Charter Review Committee to provide their update and recommendations.
Before Mr. Zach comes, I just would like to remind the council and the community, the Charter Committee was established to meet and make recommendations to council, and that's what Mr. Zach is going to be presenting today. But they met about approximately 5 times between May and July. 3 of those meetings were in person. The committee focused on term limits, increased terms, as well as eliminating unnecessary language in the charter. I would like to take a moment to just thank those members publicly for their time and for their discussion and communication during that time. I think it was very beneficial to have citizen input regarding the city's charter. And at this time, I'll turn it over to Mr. Zach.
Thank you, Ms. Reed. Thank you, Council. As a reminder, I hope it's a reminder, these proposed amendments to your charter were debated and discussed by your charter committee, and my role was to assist them in guiding them through the drafting process and ensuring that everything is done in compliance with state law and that the amendments are in compliance with state law as proposed to you. And the committee had healthy debate. They had good debate. They didn't always agree on everything, but they agreed in a very agreeable manner, disagreed in a very agreeable manner, and these are the final proposed amendments being brought to you. So there are a total of 7 measures and propositions. The measures are the actual changes to the charter, the actual red line changes, and the propositions is the language that would go on the ballot. And so with each measure, there is a proposition associated with it. I'm not going to go through all the red lines. I'm happy to answer questions. It's my understanding you've been provided a copy of those, and I can answer questions about the red lines, and I can answer questions about the actual measures and propositions as well as we go through these. So proposed proposition A It would be shall the city charter of the city of Beaumont be amended to increase city council terms from 2 years to 4-year staggered terms. So it's pretty plain. We try to draft these propositions in a way that makes it clear what's being accomplished. If it goes on the ballot and the citizens vote, they can read the proposition and understand what it is that they're voting on. So this proposition would increase city council's terms from its current term of 2 years to 4 years. It would also stagger those terms so that half of the city council is elected every 2 years. Council member that as a result of that, because of the change, it would require that the council members at large be elected by place, as opposed to the way it is currently done, which is not by place, by plurality, essentially, yeah, which would mean necessitate a majority vote, because when you increase terms from 2 years to 4 years, it requires a majority vote. And it also requires under the Constitution, when you go from 2 years to 4 years, or 3 years for that matter, you can no longer appoint to a vacancy, except in certain circumstances, and those circumstances have to be listed in your charter. And so the way it's drafted is that unless there is less than 365 days remaining in a vacant position, a special election will need to be held to fill the vacancy. If there are less than 365 days remaining and a vacancy occurs, City Council would have the flexibility to either leave it vacant, fill it by appointment, or to hold a special election. So council would have full flexibility with respect to a vacancy of less than 365 days. Any questions about Proposition A?
Mayor, go ahead.
I'm
Councilman.
assuming the 2 to 4 year term, is that more common throughout the state of Texas? And these other items that you mentioned, that's state requirement, like if you go to this 4-year term, council member at large will be elected by place. Some of these things are driven by state law, correct?
Yes, sir, they are. So everything under the increase from, well, except for the staggered term. So if you increase your term to something greater than 2 years, state law, the Texas Constitution, actually requires all council members to be elected by a majority vote. So you can no longer elect anybody by a plurality.
And the 4-year term, is that more common in other municipalities?
I would
Or
say
is there a common?
I would say it's not more common in other municipalities. I would also say that each municipality is unique. It is more common for larger communities to have longer terms.
Okay.
Councilman, I'll just share with you that the thought process or the rationale from the committee is that having longer terms would allow council to get more done. One of the members who served was actually a former city manager, Mr. McDougall, and he just said that there was an interruption in council for if you had to run every 2 years, because 1 year you were becoming acclimated if you were a new person, and then the second year you were already back to running. And so they felt like having 4 years would allow for council to both become acclimated, to assess those priorities, but then also to get something done in those later years. So that was their rationale in discussing behind increasing to 4 years.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think a 2-year term is very difficult. I'm in my 3rd term, and every 18 months, actually, you start campaigning again.
You sure
The
do.
amount of work and the amount of money it takes to get reelected is challenging. And so I agree with the increase in term. I was curious what is more common across the state of Texas.
I would say for home. So let me give you an answer with a little bit of a clarification. Almost every general law city in the state of Texas has a 2-year term because that's set by state statute. And there are more general law cities in the state of Texas than there are home rule cities in the state of Texas. So by default, most general law cities have 2-year terms, if not all of them. Most home rule cities, however, and I don't remember the numbers exactly, but they have longer terms generally, 3 or 4 years.
Okay, thank you, Mayor.
Councilman Turner.
I think it's important to ask all questions up front. So with it being place 1, place 2, of course, that would affect me and Councilmember Felshaw. So with our election be similar to the ward elections where it's you have to win by 51% or is it still majority? I just want clarity how ours would run in comparison to the mayor and the ward seats.
Yes, sir. And I'm sorry if I wasn't clear. When I state that they would have to be elected by majority, I do mean you would have to receive 51%, 50 plus 1% of the vote for purposes of being elected. If you do not, then you would necessitate a runoff between the two highest vote getters in the general election.
Councilman Getz.
Would it also be, if I'm understanding this correctly, for instance, you're going to have place 1 at large and place 2 at large, and you can choose if you're going to run for place 1 or place 2 at large. So, for instance, Councilmember Felshaw might say, I'm going to run for place 1, and Councilmember Turner would say, I'm going to run for place 2. So that they would not be actually head-to-head, and then other citizens would be able to decide, I'm going to give Councilman Turner a run for his money. I'm going to run for that particular seat, but I'm not going to go after that seat that's held by Councilmember Felshaw. Is that the way it is?
Yes, sir. That you just described it perfectly.
I want all the smoke.
Anything else on the increase? And it does too. The other thing it does, just as a reminder, currently everybody's elected at the same time. This would stagger half and half. All right, thank you.
So we would draw straws or something to.
So if y'all decide to place it on the ballot, I would work with SWA, of course, and the ordinance would then detail how that would be accomplished.
And there's what the committee discusses, making sure that the staggered elections, there would always be a fair representation in the community. So place 1 and place 2 probably wouldn't be in the same election, and it'd be opposite maybe from the mayor, to just make sure that it would always be essentially a citywide election every term. And again, the rationale for staggered elections, even though we'd have an election almost every year, kind of what we do now, was to maintain some type of institutional knowledge on council, so that the entire council wouldn't be up for election at one time.
Which is very common. That's almost how every city does it. Proposition B, shall the city charter of the city of Beaumont be amended to require individuals to sit out a single term of office after having served 4 consecutive years in a single office or 8 consecutive years in 2 offices? This is essentially a term limit with a sit-out provision. Essentially, it means that let me back up. This term limit provision, if it passes, it would apply regardless of whether or not your extension in terms passes. So right out of the gate, does that make sense? It's going to be an independent ballot proposition item. If Measure A fails, which is terms are not extended from 2 years to 4 years, then a term limit of 4 consecutive full terms with a 2-year sit-out is what would apply if it passes, if the term limit passes. If Measure A passes, if you go from 2 years to 4 years, then the term limits of 2 consecutive full terms with a 4-year sit-out would apply. Wow. And so that was done by the commission to be consistent with the number of years in your term. So if it's a 2-year term, then it's a 2-year sit-out. If it's a 4-year term, then it's a 4-year sit-out. Now I'm going to explain how that works in a moment, because it's not confusing, but it's unique in the way that this commission recommended it. And that's the last bullet point. An individual may serve consecutive terms in both offices. Now, for purposes of term limits, there are 2 offices. There's the office of council member, and there's the office of mayor, right? Doesn't matter if it's a ward or an at-large, it's still a council member. That's one office, all right? So rather than getting into the minutia of which one passes or fails, I'll just use one example. let's say that Measure A fails. You continue with 2-year terms, all right? That means that you can serve 4 consecutive full terms with a 2-year sit out in each office. Does that make sense? Does that make sense?
So you're talking about for a council member, let's
Right.
say, it would be you serve 8 years.
Yeah.
And then you have a 2-year sit out.
Yeah, it might
then
be
you could
easier.
run for-
It'll be easier. It'd probably be easier if I read the term limit example so that so that everybody understands what I'm saying. I don't want to have to paraphrase it. All right, so we're going to use the example if you just have 2-year terms. This is how it would work. A person who has served 2 consecutive terms as a council member shall be eligible to be elected to the office of mayor for 2 consecutive terms. A person who has served 2 consecutive terms as mayor shall be eligible to be elected as a council member for 2 consecutive terms. So it's 2 separate offices. So you could, as an at-large council member, serve 2 consecutive terms and then run for mayor. You wouldn't have to sit out. You could then run for mayor and serve 2 consecutive terms. Once that is done, then you have to sit out entirely for a 2-year term, right? Once you've run for office in a council member or the mayor for 2 consecutive terms, you have to sit out of that particular office for a 2-year sit out. Does that make sense?
Councilman Turner, then Councilman Getz.
I think we're kind of, or maybe I'm following, I'm mixing the two. You're saying 2 consecutive terms. That's if we're doing 4-year terms. But if we're doing 2-year terms, you would get 4 terms at
That's
2
right.
years.
Yeah,
So that's 4
I
consecutive.
apologize.
Yeah.
You are correct.
I just want to make sure I'm following you. Okay.
Yeah, that is correct. Depending on which one passes, they want to make sure everybody gets 8 years. Essentially.
Got you.
So it's either, if it's a 2-year term, it's 4 consecutive full terms. If it's a 4-year term, it's 2 consecutive terms.
Okay.
Everybody gets 8 years is
And
essentially.
if you, as a council member, you ran 8 years and you want to run for mayor, since it's a different office, would you have to sit out or you can
no,
go
you
straight
would not.
to that
You could
mayor
go
race?
straight into the mayor.
Okay, thank you.
So that's, if you do the math on that, that's 16.
16 years. Thank you.
So I'm
Councilman
hearing,
Getz and Councilman Duria.
so I'm hearing what you're saying, and I'm trying to square that with the language in proposed Proposition B. So if a person wants to run for a ward seat, the way I'm reading this, it says, sit out a single term of office after having served 4 consecutive years.
In a
Okay.
single office. Yeah, we're going to have to revise that proposition. You are correct. Yeah.
That's what's throwing me off. I
Yeah.
mean, you know, the language here doesn't match up to what you're saying.
Yeah, you are correct, and we had multiple eyes on this, and we still didn't get it in an accurate way. That proposition will have to be revised to reflect. The difficulty is that here's the difficulty in drafting this proposition. The difficulty is we also have on the ballot the change in the terms, and the commission wanted to have different term limits if different terms passed. That was easy to do for purposes of drafting possible changes to the charter, the red line, but it was difficult to put in a proposition to make clear what would be accomplished. And so the proposition will have to be amended because that isn't consistent with both propositions being on the ballot, both measures being a possible outcome.
Then why are we looking at it?
Because we needed to make sure you had it, and I got it wrong when I drafted it, and I didn't notice it until you just pointed it out. It's just the proposition.
Okay.
The proposition can be amended. My understanding, you're voting on whether this will go on the ballot.
So this will come to council to vote on, or to call for the election on August 15th. And I think that we don't have to do ballot language.
No,
until
you don't have to do
sometime
ballot
later.
language
so
until then.
you just have to call for an election by August 21st, because that's the deadline, but the way it falls, the next available meeting before that deadline is August 15th. So if it pleases the council, we'll call for an election August 15th, and we will square language sometime after that.
And actually, I'll make sure the language is squared before August 15th. The measure language is accurate. It's the proposition
Yeah,
language.
this language here, I think, is right, Councilman.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Look at this.
So forget about what's on the screen, and again, reiterate what we're saying is going to be, if you're starting from scratch, you want to run for a ward seat, and let's assume, that the 4-year terms pass.
Okay.
You can then run, and if you're elected, serve 2 terms, 8 years,
Yes, sir.
and then you can elevate to go to mayor if you wish,
Yes, sir.
not at large, but mayor,
Yes, sir.
and if elected, another 8 years,
Yes, sir.
and then sit out.
Yes, sir.
Got it.
And if you choose not to run for mayor, you have to sit out 4 years before you run for the office of council member again.
All right, Councilman Durio, then Councilman Felshaw.
When will all of us up here, except for the mayor, or like we're on our second term, so will the years that we've already served, does that apply to this if this passed?
No, sir, it is not retroactive.
Okay.
If you run for a council member, and it's a 4-year term, and you choose to stay in that lane, you can run for 4 consecutive terms, which would be 16 years, correct?
If it's 2-year terms, yes, sir, you can. You said 4 consecutive terms. Oh, we're still talking about the yes, sir, that is accurate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if I want to run for at large, and it's a 4-year term,
Yes, sir.
if I don't change,
Yes, sir.
I'm going to sit right there.
Yes, sir.
I can run for 4 terms. So I technically could.
No, sir. No, sir.
You can only do 2.
You can only do 2.
So you can't serve 16 years then. It's
You
only
could
8
serve
years
16 years on council. You could only serve 8 years
at large.
at large. Or, well, I hesitate to say at large, as a council member,
Right.
whether it be by ward or at large.
So I could serve for 2 terms
Yes, sir.
at large, give me 8 years. And
Yes,
then I
sir.
could set out for 4,
Yes, sir.
then I could come back and run for mayor.
Yes, sir. No. So you could serve for 2 terms, 8 years.
Okay?
You could immediately run for mayor.
Okay.
You wouldn't have to sit out. You could immediately run for mayor
Okay?
for 2 terms. You would then have to sit out 4 years.
I think the disconnect is that we, by this proposition, will be establishing 2 offices. The mayor is 1 office, and then at large and council member would be 1 office as well. So if you can run at a ward spot and at a at large spot, and those would be your consecutive terms. But whenever someone runs for mayor, whether they go from at large or from a ward seat, that's a higher office, so they can do that without having to sit out.
Okay.
And, sorry.
Not to unduly complicate this, but it will.
Believe me, it's already complicated.
There is certainly a difference in running a campaign for a single ward seat and an at-large seat. And your responsibilities as an at-large councilman is for the whole city. Not that we as ward members don't also have love for the whole city, but we're elected by just those in the ward that we serve. So was there any thought or discussion by the committee to distinguish between a single ward council member and an at-large council member, whereas you could run for a single ward council position, if elected, serve up to 2 terms, 8 years, if the first ballot initiative passes, and then run immediately for an at-large position like you could for the mayor, because you're running then a citywide campaign as you would if the mayor. You're looking a lot more finances, a lot more campaigning. But, in my mind at least, there is a difference between a ward position and an at-large position, yet you're lumping them all as council member.
There was my recollection is that there was a very brief discussion on the very issues that, and I'm not going to try to pretend to remember what the
Luckily for
pros
you, I
and
read the
cons.
meeting.
Okay,
I read the
good.
minutes before.
Thank you.
But what the thought process was for the committee is that that the mayor's seat was just different. Now, they did appreciate that at-large members serve as a whole, but what they wanted to do is allow any member who had served as a ward or at-large to move up to the mayor's seat without having to sit out. Again, the rationale went back to just institutional knowledge, having had someone who served on council, being able to transition into that seat without them sitting out. If we made at-large and the mayor's seat similar, then they would have to sit out. They wouldn't be able to transition into it. There wasn't a conversation about making 3 spaces, so having ward and at large and mayor. And I can't tell you why that didn't happen, but the conversation was just they just thought that the transition should be either from a ward or a council member to mayor. As opposed to maybe a council member to a council member at large and then to mayor.
Would there be any downside to making it more like the mayor, having a council member at large position be what you could transition to you serve as a council member, you've done that for 8 years, you're feeling like, well, I'm pretty good at this, but now I don't want to run. I don't want all the responsibility of a mayor, which has more responsibility, obviously than any other position. But I want to continue to serve and maybe grow the area that I represent. Would there be any downside to that?
No, and I guess their conversation never kind of drifted to that. I know they wanted, in their mind, was thinking of a step up position and just kind of wanted to make sure that any council member who had served previously on the council could just move up to the mayor's spot without the big spot, without having to sit out a term. There wasn't a conversation about making the at large spot separate. So if in your mind or under your rationale, there would be 3 places instead of 2. And so it would be council member, at large, and then mayor. And like I said, that just wasn't discussed.
So that's something we could, as a council, consider if we wanted to.
Yeah, there's still some dates with the committee. We're on a tight time frame, but if you wanted to send it back to committee or if you guys want to discuss it openly, that's something that you guys could discuss amongst yourself. Making changes to the recommendation, that's something that you always have the option to do as well. I think Charlie kind of preferences, these are just recommendations, the ultimate decision, and just in the past when we've done charter changes, when staff had done it without the input of the citizens, staff would bring to council what we felt like the recommendations would be, and council had the ability to either accept, amend, or reject those recommendations. You have a similar situation here. You can reject, amend, or accept in its totality the recommendations from the charter committee.
Well, speaking just for me, I don't have a problem with the recommendation as stated, but I kind of like what I'm proposing as well, because there's clearly a difference between a ward position and an at-large position. I'd kind of like to hear what my fellow council members think about it. This is probably the best time to talk about it. So if anybody else wants to offer an opinion on that, I'd like to hear what you're thinking.
Go ahead, Councilman Durio.
So aren't you kind of defeating the purpose of term limits by being able to sit out 2 years and run for the same position again?
So that came up. And the thought process is that you didn't want to have to do a lifetime ban, especially in cities our size. You start to run into, well, nobody else can run but this guy type of situation. So we wanted to make sure that people who were interested in serving and who had served, who wanted to continue to serve, had an opportunity to do so, and they didn't want to do a lifetime ban. So the sit-out provision doesn't necessarily eradicate term limits. What it does allow for is for fresh blood to come through, for there to be some invigoration in council. At least that was the thought process behind that. But the committee was adamantly opposed to a lifetime ban. They just didn't think that would be in the best interest of the city.
Councilman Turner.
Earlier, Madam Attorney, you mentioned that it would be place 1, place 2 at large, but we would run on a different cycle from the mayor. Let's say we had 8-year term, two 4-year terms for 8 years. And let's say Randy and Mr. West was on the same ballot. That means Mr. West would be termed out in 8 years and Randy would be at the same time as him. So if I was on the opposite ballot and I was running 2 years after or before them, how would that work? If I want to run for mayor and Randy want to run for mayor, would I have to vacate my seat to run for it? And then what would happen with my seat? Because I mean, that's an interesting aspect.
Yes, so the law requires that when you run for 2 positions of a monument, you have to vacate your spot to run. So any individual who wanted to run for mayor in a different cycle where it wasn't your time to run would have to vacate their spot to be eligible to run.
Yeah, if this is placed on the ballot and approved by the voters, folks will have to start thinking about those very things when they decide to run for office.
Well, it's going to be important which one me and Randy get stuck with Roy. Because, I mean, when you're talking about campaigning.
I take no offense to being stuck with Roy.
You're talking about campaigning, you're looking at the aspect of what Randy mentioned earlier. When we campaign, we go to our supporters for donation and finances. And if we just ran a campaign and we're coming back and trying to run a bigger one in 2 years, whichever at-large member is on the other side of the poll, if they're interested in mayor, or may not be in the best position.
Yeah, I do not disagree with anything that you just said. That's why it's important that if this is on the ballot and passes, that if folks decide they want to run for council with these provisions in place, that those are things they will have to think about when they decide to run for an at-large position or the mayor position or a ward position. They'll have to think about those things. I will say, though, that it's not nearly as rough, I guess, as, say, for example, the city of New Braunfels charter, which also has staggered terms, also has similar type of term limits, not exactly the same, but similar, but it's a lifetime ban. And so if you get it wrong in New Braunfels, you're going to lose the opportunity to do that because it's a lifetime ban. As opposed to here, you don't lose with these proposals, you don't lose the opportunity. You just have to, you would just have to sit out for a term before you decided to run again.
I'll also add that the committee was very diverse, and they had a concern about not having one election that wasn't citywide. So if both at-large members were in the same race as the mayor, and they would have ward seats that potentially would not. So there was a fear that potentially everyone wouldn't vote in at least one of those elections. So they wanted to make sure that that the elections were staggered and stacked evenly was one of the terms that they used.
And this particular proposition was heavily discussed, heavily debated, thoroughly debated, in a good way, not in a negative way. And so it has been brought to you, at least from the committee's perspective, as pretty churned out.
So for better clarity that hadn't gone over, y'all are not recommending what positions are staggered together every 2 years. You're just recommending what positions aren't together.
To be clear, I'm not recommending anything. I'm just the lawyer. I'm not the policymaker, and the charter committee was the policy. But that is my understanding.
Yes, sir. They do have a concern, or they did request that it be that council consider when it's time to consider how we stagger that. That we consider making sure that every election that's held in the city is a citywide election, so that it's more even.
And that was at my suggestion that that the committee defer to city council on how how the places get staggered.
So would that be a part of the propositions that are voted on? Would that be established in the vote?
Sir. It'll be in the ordinance.
It'll be in the ordinance, and it sounds very rudimentary, but I mean, you've done it by. It'd be something similar to how you're placed on a ballot. You pull a number out of a hat.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, Councilman Philshaw.
Thank you, Mayor. Councilman Getz, you have a standing question on our opinion about the at-large. I'm not ready to speak to it at this point, but I do agree with you that there is a difference between at-large and a ward, and some consideration perhaps needs to be given to that. Of course, I'm going to say that because I run for at-large, but I do understand, of course, through experience, the difference between running for a single ward as opposed to having a campaign throughout the entire city, and how it's required of you to represent all the different communities of our city. I mean, it's, of course, I know that each ward is there's an element in there of each community, and I get that, but it's still different. When you're at large, you have to look at the entire city, all the communities that you're representing, and it does carry with it a burden. Perhaps that's not the right word. Perhaps the right word is responsibility. And so I do agree with you that some consideration perhaps should be given to that. Thank you, Mayor.
Councilman Durio, Councilman Turner.
Yeah, on that, what was the reasoning behind lumping all of the council positions together? Because it seems to me, I guess what Mike and Randy is saying, at large is like a natural progression up from a ward councilman. And even if they've served 2 4-year terms as a ward councilman, it seems like the next move would be to run for an at-large position and right away without having to sit out. So what was the reasoning behind doing that?
Again, I don't think that they really separated it in that thought process. Their biggest focus was saying that they wanted to have someone who progressed to the board from a council member to mayor. And so they didn't want them to have to sit out to be mayor. If I'm just thinking it all the way through, they've said, you could have a council member who maybe served in a ward seat, but was mayor pro tem. Yourself, for example, who had had experience in that mayor role, who could potentially move up to mayor without having to sit out, or at large individual, same capacity. So the focus was more on not making that individual sit out if they wanted to run for mayor after they had served their or exhausted their terms in that particular seat. So it wasn't, and just in fairness, the way Councilmember Getz presented it wasn't ever discussed with the charter committee. And just so you guys kind of understand what our role was in that setting, it was not to lead or to direct the conversation. So it wasn't, we decided, myself, Mr. Williams, and Charlie decided early on that we were not going to try to insert ideas. Our main focus was to provide historical background for the city, discussions on how city operations work, as well as what's the standard or legal practices throughout the state. So presenting to them different ideas or different rationales wasn't something that we did. And Councilmember Getz's perspective of creating a 3-position just didn't come up. A lot of the things that are being presented may have been cleaned up by Charlie and myself, but none of them were presented by us.
Yeah, we didn't attempt to guide the committee into a particular decision process other than giving background information, pros and cons based on my experience because I've been doing it so long. And Ms. Reed is correct, it didn't come up. It is possible though that it may be one of the reasons it didn't come up as a major conversation. There was a very detailed and long conversation about how long should an individual be able to serve on council before it was too long. And I think it was to your point, sir, does it defeat the purposes of term limits if you can serve for 24 years? And if you're going to make it a 3-office situation and it's 4-year terms, all of a sudden you're talking about, 24 years on council, and should there really be term limits at that point? And they didn't get into that discussion with respect to the 3 offices specifically, but they did have that discussion generally with respect to how long should it be before you sit off.
And Councilmember Getz asked for my opinion. That's why my likelihood it would make more sense if all at-large positions were on the same ballot, because then you would eliminate that interest of you guys going from, and I do think it's a difference between at-large period and ward seats. And I learned that from working a ward campaign to actually running my at-large campaign. It cost a lot more money and it was a lot more work.
A lot more work.
Yeah, so, the responsibility of the mayor and the large council members are different, but at-large campaign is at-large campaign is citywide. And
Yes,
I
sir.
do think that's a huge difference that I don't want to slight or not bring to the attention of this council, because at-large is at-large. And if you looked at the numbers, we all got the same at-large votes.
Yes, sir. And of course, again, the committee did not come with a recommendation. They with respect to a specific recommendation with respect to how those staggered terms should be split up between the body. But they did have
They had
a desire. They had a desire.
They wanted it to always be a citywide election, which means that all the wards would be together and at large, and the mayor would be together. So that creates a citywide election every time.
Oh, so basically you're saying, me, Randy, and Roy would be on the ballot at the same time, and the ward members would be on the ballot at a different time. Okay,
Yes, sir.
that makes more sense to me. Yeah,
I thought they split it.
yeah, I thought they
I
split
think it
it.
wasn't clear.
So, yeah, that's
Yeah.
the, and I guess I kind of confused that last time. What they didn't want is for you guys to be on a different ballot, so that at one election it would be imbalanced. So one election would be like more citywide than other. They wanted everyone to always be, participating in the election citywide. So wards 4, like all the 4 wards would be together, and the at-large and the mayor would be together, because it creates a citywide election each time.
But doesn't necessarily, because what if you have no opponent in 2 of the wards?
Theoretically, and that was discussed, and that was obviously discussed. But what you would always have is an opportunity for it to be a citywide election, as opposed if you put the mayor in with one of the ward seats, right? It could potentially have an imbalance, because more people obviously would come out to vote potentially for the mayor, as opposed to maybe voting for Ward 1 or Ward 3. So the concept and the idea, and I believe this was presented by a few of our members. I can't really recall, but I know this was championed very hard by Ms. Choi, is that if it was not a citywide election each time, it could potentially not be equitable. And so that was a concern. And there was a discussion about that. And so again, they didn't make a decision, or they didn't come to a decision or make a recommendation on how it wanted to be staggered. And Charlie and I didn't chime in on that, but they did want it to present it to council that they believe that the citizens would benefit from a citywide election each time. And although we can't determine if all of you are going to pull an opponent, because it could be that no one runs in the at-large spot and we have no elections, and that the mayor's seat and the at-large seats are always the popular ones, and you guys get to kind of skate through, where it's either not as contested. That's a potentiality, and I think that they understood that, but it's the perception that it'd be fair and citywide each time is what they wanted to maintain.
So you're always going to have a citywide election if you have the mayor and at-large council members on the ballot. But if you have the 4 wards running, and let's say 2 of them don't draw opponents, ordinarily those are just declared elected, right? So you're going to potentially be in a situation then of having only part of the citizens. I can see confusion.
And that was discussed exactly. If you put, for example, the mayor's seat with one of the ward seats for an election, is that if there was no opponent in one of the wards, then there would be a low turnout in that ward, and potentially an imbalance or an equitable voting for that ward. And I'm just going to use the wards that are, established. We saw the ward C when we did the chart. Ward 4 is heavily minority, and Ward 1 is not. And so if those were in the same wards with the mayor, and Ward 4 didn't have an opponent, but Ward 1 was heavily contested, the idea was that it could be a potential imbalance in the favor of one of the mayoral candidates. And so that was the rationale and the discussion that was had about making sure that the wards stay together for a potential for a citywide election, and that at large and the mayor stay together, because those are citywide elections.
What if you put one of the at-large with the ward seats?
Potentially the same thing.
City Manager.
I'll just say that definitely was a concern of the committee, and they really discussed that because they didn't want to create an imbalance. Say if Chris and Otwin were on there with the mayor, they'll have a large turnout. The other part of the city could be misrepresented in that election. Or likewise, if say for you and Taylor were on there with the mayor. So they wanted to make sure that no one had any advantage in the mayor's position by having the benefit of a couple of wards having high turnouts. And so that was a real concern for them, and they debated that and came up with that.
Mayor, if I may interject.
Yes.
Before we did a charter change in 2003, I think it was, we did scatter terms when I first got on with the city in 2002. We did scatter the staggered terms where the mayor and the at-large council members ran 1 year, and then the ward council members ran the next year. So we had elections every year. The only difference in this is the term limits. But that's the way that we previously
And the
had the
length of term.
elections. Right.
You just had annual elections instead of every 2 years.
And in this case, you would not have an election every year.
Right.
It'd be every 2 years.
Yes, Councilman Philshaw.
I think we're on page 3 of, so we
The others are going to be a lot
we
easier.
may should order out for dinner, but question, City Clerk, when you did that then, wasn't there some frustration on the part of the citizens that we had these elections every year? And that was one reason why we got away from that?
That, and it saved the city money to where we weren't having to spend a large amount of money every year for elections. And so that's why it was decided to do a charter amendment and let all of the council run.
Can you give me just a round number on how much money we're talking about?
On average, back then, we were spending about anywhere from 50 to 55,000. Now we're spending 76 for this last election. We spent 76,000. Previously, when the mayor had the runoff with Mayor West and Robin Mouton, we spent 105,000. So, I mean, it varies. Of course, when we do a joint election with the school district and the port, we get to split that pot of money that we're going to spend. But in this last election, we spent 76,000.
And the answer, my thought was where they were coming up with the 16 years is the other would be 24. If you created ward, at large, and mayor. So, but again, that would be something that would be decided by this council on how that would appear. And the staggered doesn't save any money, but it does prevent a council turnover any given 2 years, because currently we have election every 2 years. So we could, the other option would be no staggered terms and just every 4 years. And then everybody's on the same. I mean, all those are considerations but this is.
Yes, sir.
But this is what's being presented by the Charter Review Committee, and certainly respect their time and energy that they put in. Yes, Councilman
If
Dury.
this measure passes and goes to the voters and it passes, will there be an election this coming May?
No, it would be in November.
Next November?
Yeah. No, this,
No, I'm not talking about, I'm talking about if it passes and we've got 4 year and staggered terms, when will the next election be for council?
When is your next election?
25?
It'd be 25. What would have to be determined at that time is.
You can determine that can be determined to move forward how you're going to do that, and that can be in the ordinance as well. I mean, I would certainly recommend that you not disrupt your current election schedule.
but also you guys would start fresh. So no one would start with, the year, like automatically have to roll off because they've been on council for 8 years. You would start fresh with your ticker, and then you would draw straws or rocks to determine who goes first.
And for clarity, I would assume, since it's going to be staggered in May of 25, there's going to be one group that is running for 2 years that would, in fact, then have 10-year term that first time.
That is
because their
correct.
4-year term wouldn't begin until 27.
That is correct.
So,
And that would be
and that would
established.
be done by
probably-
kind of straw method once it was determined by ordinance how the election was divided up.
Or if we didn't want to do straws, we could just have the council vote, the ward councilman vote against the mayor and the at-large when we want to run.
There's not a mute for that, Mike.
And one last one, Mayor, and I asked you this earlier, so I want everybody to understand why I asked it. I was asking, would our elections continue to be in May? And we want to make sure they're not falling. Well, one is on the presidential election and the other is not. The turnout would be significantly
Yes.
different then.
So we did not meet the deadline or cutoff to change our elections to November, so our elections will continue to be in May.
Okay, and Tina, every 2 years, would that still put us working with another entity so we would save that money, or would that jeopardize us putting in a situation where we're not actually able to combine those elections and save?
No, we'll still be with the other entities.
Okay, thank you.
And also, just to clarify, this is a special election for us, which is why we're able to do it in November. This is outside of our normal election schedule, so this is a special election. And Councilman Turner and Councilman Neal had asked us to look at charter review changes for the May election, but we did not meet the 2-year requirement to put it on the ballot for May, and so that's why there was a need for a special election.
So the special election for November, for clarity, is just for the charter change.
Correct.
Okay. I think we may be ready for Proposition C.
Thank you, Council. Proposition C, shall the city charter of the city of Beaumont be amended so that the city clerk is hired by and subject to the supervision of the city manager? Currently, the city clerk is hired by city council. This proposed amendment, if it goes on the ballot, would change that so that the city clerk is hired by and supervised by the city manager.
Councilman Felshaw?
Just curious, what prompted this? Can you give me that
I'm
information?
going to defer to Ms. Reed, who apparently read the minutes to refresh her memory.
So this is one where, again, we had a former city manager on our charter, Brian McDougall. He was city manager in the city of Port Arthur, and he essentially just talked about how in our charter, it specifically states that council members should not be involved in the day-to-day of council business, and that the city manager is responsible for the formulating of the city charter and some other things. Some of those responsibilities do fall under the city clerk, and so there was just almost, I don't want to call it a conflict, but it was a conflict in some of what was previously in the charter and how we were operating. And it was just suggested, again, none of these suggestions came from any of staff, that we move the city clerk underneath the city manager to remove that responsibility for council to supervise someone who handles the elections. And so just to kind of give her that benefit to report to the city manager, but also to give the city manager some control over the responsibilities that were tasked to him under the charter that are the responsibility of another employee.
Councilman Turner?
For me, I would much rather see these things discussed and streamlined in a proper position. The current council, we only supervise 4 current positions, and we can't really technically get into the directors, and our city manager makes it very clear when we're getting out of our lane. So for me, I'm not in support of losing one of my 4 employees. So I don't mind speaking up, boldly saying it. We already supervise 4. And to cut it down to 3, I'd much rather streamline and make it more efficient versus cutting it down.
Councilman Durio?
Do you know if this is the way it's done in most cities?
This is the trend. So just sort of a big umbrella historical overview. When every city in Texas was a general law city, under the general law city, under general status, most city secretaries in smaller communities, they wear multiple hats. They're the city secretary, they're the city manager, they're the public works director. They're doing a bunch of different things. And the state law for all general law cities, the state law is that the city secretary, unless changed, is hired by the city council. And so when cities first initially started adopting home rule charters, they just they went with the way things were done. This is how we did it. This is how we're going to do it moving forward. The trend is in a home rule government. The trend is for city clerks and city secretaries to now more fall under the purview of the city manager. But that's mostly because city clerks and city secretaries are now doing more day-to-day administrative duties, which do tend to fall under the day-to-day operations of a city manager, as opposed to the legislative functions of the governing body. And so it is the trend. But that does, I mean, and I'll say to y'all what I say to everybody: y'all are Beaumont, y'all aren't,
Councilman Getz.
One of the things the city charter currently allows us to do is for the city manager to select the police chief and the fire chief, but then the council has to ratify that decision. Is that something that could be done for something like this as well?
Absolutely, yes, sir. Mm-hmm.
Only thing I have to add, being new to council and just coming from the training for newly elected officials, and because a lot of people in the city may not understand or don't have clarity, just being the new mayor, I understand that, is that we are a city manager form of government. So we do express the desires on the direction that we want the city to go, and we certainly approve the budget. But he manages the day-to-day because many people are employed and don't have the time to be spending. So I certainly understand from a management standpoint, because he is responsible to the council. So he's going to certainly do his best to please the council as long as it's meeting the laws and and what's best overall for the city, knowing that that's what all we want. So I understand the streamlining of it from that standpoint. So not to so reducing a position from the council hire I wouldn't find offensive. But I appreciate Councilman Turner's position.
Okay. I think
that may be good. You have another one?
I understand coming out of we'll call the private sector and the government and the Open Meetings Act and all that has to be done. And I understand that. I think there's always a tension there, though. Here we are now discussing a position of the individual who sits here. And how long have you been with the city, Tina?
August 26th, it'll be
21 years. And so that for me, that creates an uncomfortable for me. I guess the remedy to that is then you have to take it to executive session. Can that be, again, city attorney, can you put on executive session the position of city clerk to discuss that in private? Or am I crossing boundaries now with the Open Meetings Act and protocol for executive session?
So you can put employees that you supervise on executive session for discussion, but you couldn't discuss whether or not to move the city clerk under the city manager or a charter change provision in closed session. And just so you know, I think Tina was made aware of this side before it was presented, but not the discussion part prior. And again, this was something that wasn't even on the list of things that we had decided that we wanted to present. I think when we established the Charter Review Committee, there were several items that I told you we would be bringing to the Charter Committee to review. They actually came with their own ideas, and this was one of them.
Well, and it's not that I have anything negative to say about Tina. It's just, again, you're talking about a position. It creates somewhat an uncomfortableness up here. But I had the instinct that you were going to tell me no, because so many times when I want to do something, I can't.
And I don't know if it helps you, council member, and because this really is, and even at the committee level, it was never a discussion about the person. It was always a discussion about about the position.
And I
not
agree
the
with that.
person.
I get that. And that's why I said I have nothing negative to say about Tina. You're talking about the position, but yet the position is represented by a person.
Yeah.
And so I wasn't sure if we could do that. But with that said, we can't. And so just sitting here now, I would lean more towards a Councilman Turner's position, that I'm uncomfortable with this. Is at least I can say that I'm uncomfortable with this proposition.
Councilman Durio, then Councilman Getz.
So I don't think if this proposition passes, that it's going to have anything to do with our current city clerk. This will take effect with the next city clerk. Or will the supervision of this city clerk under the city manager start right when this passes? Or would everything start whenever they hire another city clerk?
It would begin immediately after it's adopted.
That's why I mentioned it's hard to separate the position from the person. Because it does. So anyway, I'm sorry. I spoke out of turn.
I say that that's the way it's drafted now. It could be drafted in a way that it doesn't take effect until the new city clerk. Who is this? Ms. Prashad, I'm sure, is doing a fantastic job. She's been here for over 20 years. So if and when.
And that was exactly my point. Why don't we consider doing this upon the city clerk's retirement, and it's time to then hire a new city clerk, and it would take effective at that point.
You start fresh.
And you start fresh. We could draft it in that way.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. City Manager, do you have something?
I don't know if I want to say anything. I'll just say this is doing something like this. AJ, since you're for this one, that means you're for E. When we get to E, you're okay with E. All right? Okay.
It's moving the city attorney under the city manager.
Of course, this would take a position off from the council. That's always a consideration for you when you make that decision. That's probably the biggest con for you in making such a decision is and looking at that too. Then too, it's just tough on the existing clerk. I had a conversation with it. It's just that, and then there are. And I'll be honest with you, this wasn't my idea. It wasn't my idea. But there are some benefits to it. There are definitely benefits to it as far as operating a city. This is just the best practice. This is how cities do it now. They do it with the clerks working with the city manager because they interact so much, and there's so many things that are done that it's the city manager kind of needs and depends on them to be able to. So the manager has no authority to get them to do anything. The agenda has been done for years here, but it was done out of the city manager's office when things like that should be done out of the clerk's office. And I hate to speculate, but I'm guessing the city manager probably didn't have authority to do some things, so he made sure it was done out of his office. So it's just, it interferes with the flow of work and how some things are done and some things, processes here could be smoother if you do some things like that. But I certainly respect Tina and what she does, and I wouldn't want to do anything that's going to harm her for sure. But citywide, for the city, for future of this city, that's the best practice, and that's the way these things are going.
And clearly here, we could amend the proposal to start upon the next city clerk when it was time for them.
Sure.
Okay.
Good.
Anything else on this one, or can we move forward to D?
We're on page 6 now of 19 pages.
This proposition was also, I think, one that was suggested by one of the committee members. Shall the city charter of the city of Beaumont be amended to require the city council to hold such regular meetings as necessary to efficiently conduct the affairs of the city? Currently, the charter reads that the city council shall meet at regular meetings each week unless postponed for a valid reason, which obviously then requires you to have a meeting to to postpone a meeting or cancel a meeting. This language essentially gives flexibility to be able to hold such number of meetings as necessary. And if it's not necessary to hold a meeting every week, you can take a week off. Thank you, sir, so much. Pretty straightforward change.
Does anybody have any discussion on that? That's pretty straightforward.
And I'll just tell you that this one was discussed to allow for council to kind of establish a council meeting calendar so that there would be some continuity or, notice for citizens could go on and see. Like right now we meet every Tuesday, but, just if council wanted to schedule breaks for themselves so that, vacations and so forth, so you could, know when that was happening and we can continue with city business. It is.
Right. I think that's good.
This is also, to use City Manager Williams' language, best practice for purposes of charters.
Thank you.
Proposition E, shall the city charter of the city of Beaumont be amended to clarify the authority of the city manager and the city council's role? This section adds multiple sections clarifying the city manager's role in the council manager form of government. It lists out several items that make very clear what the city manager's authority is. And then it adds another section that makes clear city council's legislative role with respect to the city manager's administrative authority and responsibilities.
Question.
Councilman Getz?
Yeah, I've looked at the city charter multiple times, and it seems to address this pretty well right now. What specific changes are you looking at to further clarify this?
There is, in my opinion, this is not a substantive change to your charter. This is language that the committee has requested we put in here to make clear what is already the law.
So it's more clarity
Yes, sir.
as opposed to substance.
As opposed to substance.
I have a question.
Councilman Turner?
Madam Attorney, when do we normally do our employee evaluations for the council when we evaluate you, the city manager, city magistrate, and Ms. Tina?
Usually prior to the adoption of the budget, so in September.
In September. So one thing I do want to...
You can do it earlier if you like.
Okay, one thing I do want to state while we're on this topic, and this is something I've had an issue with since I've been on the council. Almost everything I've been involved with, you set expectations, you set goals, and you come back and measure if we going in the same direction prior to deciding if we're going to do salary increases, raises, things of this magnitude, and you give your employees something realistic that you're trying to see them accomplish. Since I've been on council, I've wanted to see this, and I haven't seen this with true direction of our employees. So at this time, I think it's appropriate to talk to the council about maybe giving Mr. Williams, Ms. Tina, Judge Lively, Ms. Reed, clear directions of what we want to see accomplished. So when it's time to come back and evaluate and assess them, we actually have something to go by. And I just think that would be better for them, because now they're not kind of lost and confused. We can be wanting them to do something, and we never told them up front. So how is it fair to come back and maybe get to a point where we're talking about an increase, and a council member may be disappointed about something you knew nothing about? So I think this is a opportunity to be more clear. With the previous city manager, I asked that, after my first year, because it didn't make sense. Most times you evaluate it and you kind of know your expectations as a group. So I just want to know, a feel from council members how you guys feel about clarity. I know I talked to Mr. Williams once, and he told me normally prior to that evaluation, he knows what his expectations is as a whole. And I know we haven't really did that as a council for you. So I think this is a time that, from your experience, Mr. Williams, do you think that would be better, or you think the way we do it now is okay? What are your thoughts?
And I hate to say the word contract, but the contract that I have with the city, it outlines the evaluation process and how that's to take place, and that council is supposed to identify goals that I'm to achieve for the coming year. And I think it actually says after the budget's approved. After this budget's approved, then we sit down and plan how that's going to go forward from there. So it's kind of outlined for me, not so much for Tina and Sheree and the judge. And so some process can be put in place, but it's identified that when you get ready to evaluate, you got to have a set of goals that we're going to mutually agree on, that we're going to work toward and agree with for next year's evaluation.
And that was my thoughts. It's like hard to evaluate if you're not giving hard, goals that both parties agree on to see if we get going in the same direction of getting where we need to go.
And I just want to clarify that the charter amendments are just not necessarily intended for evaluation purposes, but it should be the standard. Like this is at the base level what should be doing and what should be happening. Anything outside of that would just kind of be, cream additives that the council is adding. But at the base level, the amendment in Measure E is just saying, at the very least, this is what the city manager should be doing. And this particular provision, again, just by the people who are on the board, what they, felt like should be clarity. A lot of the benefit to having citizens on this council, and we had a really, really good committee, is that they wanted to make sure that they understood what the expectations should be from a city manager. And they wanted that clarified in their charter. And so this is kind of what they expressed, and then Charlie just added the words to it.
It's me kind of throwing a lie about Roy before we get to it. I know it wasn't directly towards this, but I just want to see what was the council's appetite on that.
It might be appropriate for us to schedule a workshop in the future to discuss that, and that way it could be prepared. I mean, at this point in my short tenure, I have a good bit of clarity in it, but I hadn't had the amount of time that you've served. And so I can, if that's...
That is an employee issue with the employee that you supervise. So to Council Member Felshaw's delight, that is something that you can discuss in executive session.
Wow.
Oh, okay.
There you go.
So, but not today. So it's not on so we can add that to another day.
It still has to be posted.
And probably not next week, because it's going to be a long week. 2 weeks. So.
Okay. Almost done, Council. So the next two, is that right? F and G. F and G are the last two. These are mine. This is my review of your charter to determine whether or not it's in compliance with state law, and whether or not what can be eliminated, which is non-substantive in nature, to create a shorter, more efficient looking charter. So F rather, is an amendment to bring your charter into alliance with state law. So the charter proposition is, shall the city charter of the city of Beaumont be amended for consistency and compliance with state law?
And just for clarity, a lot of the changes that Charlie made to this particular in Measure F were previously brought under the previous charter change. But it's in talking with Tina, just going through how individuals voted, it just seems that they just became overwhelmed with the amount of things that we were asking them to vote on. And so lumping them together just to say, hey, do you want your charter to be in compliance with state law, was a suggestion that was made just so people understand clearly what they're voting on. A lot of these things do touch some of our finance issues, but it just would make our charter in compliance with state law. And so right now we have a disconnect between what we're supposed to do under our charter and that we were required to do under state law.
Any questions?
Doesn't appear.
All right. And then, so the next one is G, Shall the city charter of City of Beaumont be amended to delete repetitive and unnecessary provisions? Essentially, I went through your charter and I have made recommendations on provisions that can be deleted that are not substantive in nature, unless it's already in the charter. I think there was one place where you had a substantive provision in there twice, and I just deleted it from one section, so it's still in there. So this particular amendment would delete significant sections of your charter that are not necessary to be in your charter, either because it's just not required to be in your charter, or because it's repetitive of being somewhere else in your charter, or repetitive of being somewhere in state law and it's not necessary to be in your charter.
Councilman Getz?
So we know, especially from this legislative session, that over there in Austin, the legislature is making more and more rules and changes that kind of control what a city can and can't do because it's being legislated out of Austin. And in that vein, when you have something in your city charter that conflicts with state law, you can't enforce it anyway.
Yes, sir.
So why have it if it's not enforceable because state law has already spoken to it?
Yes, sir. I agree with that wholeheartedly. I'm not a fan of I mean, I could go down the whole thing, and I'm not going to waste your time because I know y'all have a lot of business to do today. But I'm not on a basic level, I'm not a fan of repeating state law and charters, because if state law changes, all it does is create confusion with your citizens, because either because you're doing something that's in violation of your, they think is in violating your charter, but it's actually in compliance with state law, and it just creates confusion.
Kind of what we have now. The language that's proposed to be in our charter would make sure that we were always in compliance with state law, so that we wouldn't have to amend our charter to become in compliance. And that's a big thing.
It's very good.
That's all I have, Council.
Thank you.
I had one question on this.
Mandurio.
The powers of the city. So everything that's crossed out is going to be taken out of the charter?
Yes, sir.
So on the one about Section 10, relatives of officer, is that a state law?
Yes, sir.
So it doesn't have to be in our charter?
Yes, sir. So any and everything that was removed in that is already in state law. And so as state law amends and changes and adapts, our charter will automatically, through the adoption of this provision, change and adapt.
Yeah, that's the nepotism provision, and that's the nepotism provision that's in your charter is the same as the nepotism provision that's in state law that already prohibits those types of things.
Okay. City Manager?
Thank you, Mayor. Before you go off this item, I'd just like to recognize the members of the committee. I mean, they worked hard and they worked diligently. Meeting. We started out with virtual meetings, but they wanted to meet in person. They wanted to meet with each other and talk eye to eye and read each other's body language, et cetera, to get some things done. And as the city attorney said, we basically sit there and we were just resource people. We didn't come with any ideas or anything. These were their ideas, basically. And some of the things did come into play by having a city manager on that committee that was familiar with government. We had other people who were familiar with government on there. So they were great. And I just like to call their name and recognize them so the public will know who was on that committee. And they are Ms. Robin Troy, Roy Steinhagen, Francis Sam, LaShawn Proctor, Corey Crenshaw, Melanie Samuel, Jesus Abrego, Charlene Cook, Robert Calvert, Dalen Turner, Brian McDougall, and we had a youth representative, Mr. Sam Marchand. And I'd just like to thank them for the work they've done so far.
Thank you. Councilman Durio, do you have something else before we moved on?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
I had the extra rate question. Is it standard? I know at the county level they do filing fees and things of that magnitude. I know we're talking about new trends. Is it a trend going where cities are doing filing fees, or that's not possible through state law? Or?
I don't know if Sheree has it memorized. I don't have it memorized, but state law does dictate how you can get on the ballot, either the requirement of a fee, or there's a in lieu of a fee, you can submit a petition, I believe is what the state law. So my point is state law dictates what those parameters are.
And I guess if that's something that you're interested in, me and Tina can work together and determine like what's best practices for the city.
Well, at this point, I'm only 1 out of 7, so I do want to know if it is appetite to look at that as well, if that's standard.
So for clarity, right now, there is no fee and there is no petition required to run for city council. And so what you're proposing is that we might look at a fee or a petition option in order for someone to run for any of the council positions.
Yes.
Okay.
And the state does not, as you can remember, doesn't limit what that filing fee is.
My recollection is the state law does dictate what that looks like.
So they actually put an amount on there.
I believe that they do.
Okay.
I haven't looked at that provision of the state law in quite a while, because it's not normally anything we get involved in.
Perhaps we can just follow state law if there is a state law on it, because currently we do not. So we could, I guess, find out what that is and look about following that rather than adding something that would be redundant.
Yeah.
Yes, Councilman Duria.
So you talking about adding a fee or having to go out and get a petition to run for a city council position?
Yes, I was asking, do other cities do that? Because I'm not too familiar. And I know at the county level, I know it happens, but I just want to know if it actually happens.
There are a few cities that do it. I know for sure City of Houston does it. It's consistent with their city charter that they do that. The cost to run for a council member position is like $500. The mayor is a little more steeper at $1,250. And so they do have that, but it's consistent with their charter. I can look and see what the parameters would be for state law.
Revenue for the city.
Yeah, but those fees can prevent people from running.
Yeah,
The relief is there with a petition.
Yeah, that's why you can do the petition.
Right.
That costs also.
Well,
I mean, when you're running a campaign, you put your time in.
Councilman Getz.
That was something I wouldn't be for.
so when a candidate signs up to run, right now we don't charge anything, but there is a cost to the city, I guess, through the clerk's office to assemble all that, or don't you typically do something for each candidate to?
The only thing that I do for a candidate is prepare a candidate packet, and there is a cost as far as, the paper and purchasing the binders.
In your time?
Yeah, and the time.
Is it $500?
Well, that's the city.
No, sir.
That's the city of Houston because they're just, a bigger city. But that's what they chose to do. But obviously there are different cities that have different filing fees and filing costs. And there's a non-refundable. You could do that. You could do it differently.
Councilman Felsaw.
Councilman Durio, I think one of the reasons cities do that is it causes people to give pause and to consider, is this something I really want to do? Am I doing it for the right reason? As opposed to an emotional decision where they get angry with the council or the city and they come down and file and they put their name on the ballot to be running. But then they're not a serious contender because they really haven't given a lot of thought to it. I think the filing fee probably causes people, and I'm speaking out of ignorance because we don't have one, but I would assume that the filing fee, part of that is to cause people to give pause, to consider it, to seek counsel, and then say, yeah, this is something I really want to do, or else they're not going to pony up the $500 to do it.
And
I'm assuming that's one of the reasons.
And just to ask a question, like I'm in the election code now, there isn't like a set filing fee. It just says that if you're going to have a filing fee,
That's right. You have to have the option of the petition.
Yeah, you have to have the option of petition, but also it needs to be outlined in your charter. And with anything, it needs to not be for the purpose of the city to profit. It would, obviously we would have to determine how much, or, the expenses that it costs to put the binders together, the cost for those things, and then we would, accumulate a cost for that. Larger cities where several people run, maybe that expense is greater. For our city, it could be less. So it probably would not be $500 for a council member. Maybe it'd be significantly less. But the election code does
Say how many
require-
signatures have to be on a petition?
It doesn't. It just says that if you're going to do it, like it talks about if you're going to require a filing fee, there's a special section that talks about when you need to refund it. If they're declared ineligible, if they die, all those different things. If they're declared ineligible, it doesn't talk about a max filing fee or a minimum filing fee. It does, So I can forward you that provision if you'd like to see it.
Thank you.
Thank you. I don't believe there's any other questions.
Very good.
All right.
Charlie.
Have a great rest of your meeting.
Thank you.
Thanks, Charlie.
For those that are here for the presentation and would like to leave, now's the time to do so. Thank you for coming. So none of y'all came for that presentation. All right. Now is the time for any citizen who wishes to speak. You may make public comments on the consent agenda, the regular agenda items 3 through 6. Items 1 and 2 have already been heard in public hearing and are not available for comment. At this time, citizens may also speak on matters of public concern, and we will open that up again at the end, but you are only permitted to speak once on open public comments. There's no longer green slips. Citizens may now sign up to speak using the kiosk in the back, which I believe is working. There's a city employee back there to assist you if you have trouble signing up using the kiosk for the rest of this month, which maybe through August now, okay? The city clerk will call your name when it's your time to speak. When you approach the podium, please say your address, city, and state. And please keep your comments to 3 minutes. The green light will come on when you approach the podium. The red light will come on when your time is up.
Tony Carey, your public comments.
Good afternoon, everyone. The city council, everybody knows me but the mayor, and he walked up to me and introduced himself, and he said, "I'm Roy West, the mayor." I go, "Yeah, I know you." Yeah, but anyway, I'm so happy to be here today. I wanted to speak on an issue that's near and dear to my heart about the homeless, because I have a nonprofit called Feed the Sheep Man, and it's focused toward just helping regular old Joes, so a place where they can have a shower, bath if they need it, because I think cleanliness is so needed. We do have enough food. They do eat, but they're so dirty. I mean, it's so sad, And I want to guess, because I'm in Ward, not guess, I'm sorry, Mr. Guest, but I'm in Ward 4. Chris, maybe he could come with me and ride around, because now that it's so hot, it's really bothering me. I live in 2 places. I mean, I vote here because I live here. But I work in California sometimes because I have 2 licenses. I work in California when I'm there because that's my home. That's where I used to live, and I live here now. But anyway, that's near and dear to my heart. But I love what you said, Mayor, because when you said about the shooting that went down, and I love the quote you quoted. You said, if you get into a conflict, just try to walk away, because really it takes 2. It's easy to get in a fight, and it's hard to get out of one. And so that amazed me. My husband is a news junkie. He's a junkie. And so I don't like the news, and most women don't, because it's always something sad or grief. But when I saw that today, that just broke my heart, and about the last shooting that we had. And I do have a petition that I have going around trying to get signatures. I've been to many churches, and I'm going to go visit Randy's church, because he said that I could come because I'm trying to get signatures, get it on the ballots to get prayer back in school. So I just wanted to say that today and just thank you guys very much for having me. And, you know, this was very pleasant and I learned a lot today because I didn't know that was going down. And I hope that you do get 4 years, whatever that means, because I don't think 2 years is enough to get anything done. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Ricky Jason, public comments?
Good evening. I'm community activist Ricky Jason, 1075 Magnolia, Beaumont, Texas. I also am the protege of the late Dick Gregory. Now, I came here last time, and I'm humble again today to say that, Mayor, the citizens of Beaumont wants to see the videotape of Christopher Shaw that Officer James Gillum paralyzed. We have the right to see the videotape. Mr. Shaw's trial starts this month. Pre-trial on the 14th, municipal court trial on the 15th, and the 21st is the trial. I'm standing with Ben Crump, Reverend Al Sharpton, Black Lives Matters, Danny Simmons, Chuck D from Public Enemy, Rap-A-Lot Family, Stevie D. Lundy of the Force MDs as well, and William Bishop Barber. I'm standing with all those people because, Mayor, I'm asking you, why can't we see the audio tape? You're the mayor. The tape will show exactly what happened to Christopher Shaw. Y'all gonna try to have a trial without showing the community, the citizens, the taxpayers, the world have a right to see that audio tape of how Mr. Christopher Shaw, how this happened to him, how he got paralyzed. Look at this here. He's paralyzed. He can't even walk. We want to see the audio tape, Mayor. The buck stops with you here. I'm asking you again, can the citizens of Beaumont, Texas see the audio tape where Officer James Gillum, when Mr. Christopher Shaw was handcuffed at the jailhouse, dropped him on top of his head and paralyzed Mr. Shaw? Can we see the tape? We demand to see the tape. Taxpayers have the right to see the tape. Let us see the tape. Zena Stevenson is sitting on the audio tape. That videotape, we wants to see that. That'll solve the whole case because justice is coming to Beaumont. And none of y'all up here, some of y'all not gonna have a job. You have an opportunity. I came the other times, I came another time and another time. This time I'm asking you, Mayor, let the citizens see that audio tape of Christopher Shaw being dropped on top of his head at the jailhouse and paralyzed, because if he would have been white, it would have been shown. If he would have been a Phelan or a Rogers, it would have been shown. Because he's Christopher Shaw. He's somebody. I ask you again, Mayor, we want to see the videotape. Can we see it?
Thank you.
Albert Harrison, public comments?
Mayor West, City Council, other city staff members, and concerned citizens. I want to, first of all, thank you, Mayor, for allowing me to take a picture with you and my 3 boys I brought to the pool on Saturday. I thought that was going to be a real pleasurable day, but to my knowledge, later on, it come out not to be. First of all, the 3 boys I had with me went into the pool and signed in approximately right at 12 o'clock when the pool opened, okay? As to my knowledge and their knowledge, matter of fact, my 11-year-old great-nephew has read all of the rules that's posted at the pool. Now, approximately around about 3 o'clock or 3:30, after I complained about water that was running that I saw was a safety problem. Not until then, when I went outside to do something else, my great nephew came to me with the other two boys and said, "We've been put out of the pool." Now, don't get me wrong. I agree with the 2 hour. You can only stay in the pool for 2 hours. I have no problem with that. That's a safety rule. So I agree with that. But it's not posted anywhere. Nor was I told, nor were the 3 children told about a 2 hour rule. Had to get out the pool. So all I'm asking is that please post it or have someone to inform someone, especially the adult that's with the children, about 2 hour rule. Thank you.
Thank you. It is reminded somebody from the city will contact people that approach the podium to address their concerns.
Charlie Crabb, item number 3 on the agenda, and I think maybe public comments as well.
Good afternoon, Mayor, Council, staff, department heads, and other support staff that are attending here today. Thanks for your services, City of Beaumont. I read the specifications for the enlarged paratransit van. It is very impressive. My question is that large van needed? It shows us transport for wheelchair victims, but not patients. But in one design was 2 patients, and normally you'll see the transport van, the normal seated transport van. They'll be transporting one person to their medical or whatever their need is, and that's my concern about it's an expensive van, and there should be a presentation to council justifying the paratransit van. I observed Pennsylvania Street north of Washington being scraped of old asphalt covering. Sabine Pass north of Washington has been scraped and looks ready for the new asphalt covering. Drivers that use these 2 streets will appreciate the rehabilitation. Park Street north of Washington is in pretty good shape. Please wait a few more years before rehabbing the street. Also, the Park Street intersection north of Washington sure could use a nice scraping and a new layer of asphalt. Okay, and then of course we've got the resurfacing of 4th Street, but the Laurel crossing could use a little smoother temporary transit from across that. It's a pretty good bump for people coming into downtown Beaumont. And Proposition B, 4 years for council. I don't think that's good. I think the citizens deserve to be able to support their councilman and exchange it. And it is a complex that with at-large councilman to, and I'll continue that another day.
Thank you, Mr. Crabb.
Thank you.
Charlie and Sam, public comments.
Address.
You can, yes.
2370 Monroe Street, Beaumont, Texas, 77703. Okay, so First of all, I was told to contact the city council. And then after this, the security officer said, you can follow up with the employees for further clarification. Upon doing that, the lady told me, well, the judge gets to make the rules, and he can make whatever rules he wants to. Well, just because you make a rule doesn't mean that it's necessary or effective. A fool can make a rule. Now, my 3 questions as it relates to these rules. First of all, as it is related to the Beaumont Municipal Court, who makes the rules, policies, and regulations to enter their building, and who sends out those communications? Number 2, how long is the time frame that it takes for someone to follow up from the city? Because I did get a reply, so thank you, but I haven't received that follow-up just yet. And number 3, why are employees allowed to have their cell phones when the public is not? Because the security guard was adamant when I walked in that building, you cannot have a cell phone at all for any reason. She made me leave the building over a cell phone that was in my bag, not even on. So those are my 3 rules, because those are the 3 questions, rather, that I want somebody to be able to answer for me. Because, like I said, it makes no sense, especially the cell phone rule. When I'm looking at an employee, laughing and giggling, thumbs steady moving, kicking, so I know she ain't have no emergency. So she's so distracted, she can't even help me. So it seems to me that, hey, yeah, you have rules and policies. I have no problem with that. My issue is that it seems to me that we have rules, regulations, and policies that make no sense. And at that point, why do we even have them?
Thank you.
Addie Allen, public comments.
She wants to wait till the end.
Mark Williford, public comments.
My name is, my name is Mark Williford, and I reside at 6395 Westgate, Beaumont, Texas. And several residents has asked me to come and speak on behalf of some of the concerns. And the recent shooting over at Beaumont West Apartments was tragic, and our thoughts and prayers with those that were involved in that. But this has been the second killing at that apartment complex. In addition to that, there's a random shooting on Ivanhoe, really a drive-by shooting on Ivanhoe near Jason's Deli. And that's begun to force us to begin to work with the city fire department, the police department, and Council Member Getz has done an outstanding job in listening to our concerns, and we want to thank him for that. But what the facts are pointing to, based on Beaumont Fire Department, police, and fire reports, it's showing that there is an emerging trend in those 2 apartment complexes at Glen Oaks and Beaumont West Apartments. It's potentially becoming a public nuisance of these property managers to enforce their lease, provide security and safety to those residents. And what's happening is it's beginning to spill over into our neighborhood. Based on the police department's reports that we provided to Mayor Getz, and I think I shared those while you were a candidate, Mayor West, that you can see clearly that in a 12-month period in 2022, the police department was out there every other day at both complexes. This all began when our fire trucks did an outstanding job, but they were out there every other day, sometimes 2 to 3 times a day at Glen Oaks. And we calculated that at a cost of about $463,000 to the city. Until, thanks goodness, Mike Getz went out, worked with the fire department, and that issue was resolved when they repaired the broken alarm system. But what it disclosed was that there is a crime problem in that area. I personally confirmed today, even after the killing at Beaumont West, they refused, or to be fair, they have not hired a security officer. At one time, they had one. What we're seeing now is a trend, and you have to look at the trend analysis. We're seeing gang graffiti across from Sally Curtis, gang graffiti on the backside of a multi-million-dollar home from Rogers Park. There's been a couple of shootings at Rogers Park. We're seeing businesses that tailor to the criminal element popping up in that area. But here's the bottom line. Homeowners do not want to see their property values decrease, Okay? Business owners don't want to be afraid of a stray bullet killing one of their patrons as they go to eat in that beautifully new renovated shopping center. Harmony Hill school students and Marshall Middle School student parents don't want to see their kids going to school in a high crime area. And I know this is a very difficult position to be in, but property managers have to follow the Texas Property Code. They have to enforce the lease. They have to provide habitability. And I would ask that if this trend continues,
Thank you.
is to provide some type of injunctive relief.
Jerome Alexander, public comments?
Good afternoon. How everybody doing? 1118 Avalon Street, Beaumont, Texas. I come today to ask the city manager a question. Sir, you know a lot of these people that's getting these contracts with the city and they building all these apartment complexes. But when they building a lot of them, I don't know, for like the older people that y'all give them codes to have ramps for them, for the older people that they put in there for wheelchairs and different things like that. Because at the Raintree apartment, it's like the second time it happened. My mother-in-law live over there. And it was in the freeze and the elevators cut out. So they had no way to get down because of the stairs. And a lot of them in wheelchairs and stuff like this. So I'm just asking that maybe when y'all start building these buildings for the senior citizens, you all got them on the floors, that y'all have them like with the ramps when they can get out with the wheelchair, we can easily get them out like that when it's time to get out of fire or something. Because they were stuck over there and they had the fire department, which, you know, thank God they came and they helped them out and put them in places that they needed to go till they got the elevators fixed. But this it happened at Laura Vista. It's like these apartments where they got the older people at, and it's like nobody ain't really concerned. Their safety is a concern to all of us, really, but I mean, the fire department and stuff, they come out, but they really can't do nothing. You know, how they gonna get them out if we catch a fire? And some people gonna get caught at the top. So I just, you know, we just requested that y'all see the buildings when y'all build them, then maybe y'all make the ramps where the people can get in and out safely. You know, if it's a fire, an ambulance, need to get them from the top. And also, I would like to say that if y'all don't believe this guy, he coming, he asking y'all about the videotape. Hey, these people mad in Beaumont, they just not saying nothing. And then when these court days come, these people gonna feel the streets because we feel what they saying. That this man walked in there, as a black man, he walked in there, he came out, he was paralyzed. Hey, like he said, if it been a white guy, everybody, we would have seen the video. I'm just being honest. People want to see that video. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's all that I have, Mayor.
All right, now we'll move forward with the consent agenda. Is there a motion and a second for approval of the consent agenda?
Move to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the consent agenda. Any discussion? All in favor of approving the consent agenda, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Mr. City Manager, would you, may we have the reading of item number 1, please?
Yes, Mayor. Council consider a request for a specific use permit to allow a mother-in-law's apartment in an RS, which is residential single-family dwelling district, for property located at 4630 Ashdown Street. And it was at a joint public hearing, with the Planning Commission. They voted 7-0 to approve with the following conditions. No separate utility meters will be allowed for the apartment. The apartment shall not be used as a rental property, and no permanent structure or appurtenances shall be placed within the easement property. And recommendation of approval of the permit.
Is there a motion for item number 1?
Move to approve the specific use permit.
Is there a second for the approval?
Second.
There's a motion and a second for approval of item number 1. Any discussion? All in favor of approving item number 1, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. City Manager, may we have the reading of item number 2, please?
Council consider a request for abandonment of Doctors Drive and a portion of 15th Street. And a joint public hearing held on July 2023. The Planning Commission recommended 7-0 to approve the request, and recommendation of the ordinance with retention of a general utility easement is recommended.
Is there a motion for item number 2?
Move to approve.
Second.
And there's a second by Councilman Getz. There's a motion and second for approval of item number 2. Any discussion? All in favor of approving item number 2, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion is carried. City Manager, may we have the reading of item number 3, please?
Yes. Council consider a resolution approving the purchase of 1 paratransit van for use at the ZIP. We got 3 quotes, and staff is recommending approval of the resolution.
Is there a motion for item number 3?
Move to approve.
It's been moved. Is there a second for item number 3?
Second.
Moved and seconded for approval of item number 3. Any discussion? Councilman Durio.
I have a question I got from one of the my constituents. So this van here, is this for do they go to pickups at a bus stop, or is this the ones that goes to people's house for private pickup?
Yes, sir. So this is part of our STS or special transit. So it's door-to-door ADA transit, not the fixed route buses.
Okay. And how do folks get on the list for that?
So they would apply through our transit system, the Zip Transit, if they can just call their office and apply. They do need to fill out an application because it is ADA, and then it's a first come, first served system.
Would they be able to get that information from 311?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, Councilman Turner.
Mr. Williams, if possible, for that particular service, I had a few seniors ask me as well. Maybe we can look into maybe a how-to video, similar like how to ride the buses and things of that magnitude, just to kind of advertise and then let the citizens know how can they apply, or maybe a flyer with step-by-steps.
Okay.
Any other discussion? All in favor of approving item number 3, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion is carried. City Manager, may we have the reading of item number 4, please?
Council consider a resolution canceling the purchase of 2 trucks for sewer maintenance. Staff recommends approval of the resolution.
Is there a motion for item number 4?
Move to approve the resolution.
Is there a second?
Second.
There's a motion and a second for approval of item number 4. Any discussion? All in favor of approving item number 4, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion is carried. City Manager, may we have the reading of item number 5, please?
Council consider a resolution approving the purchase of 3 vehicles for use in the sewer maintenance department, and staff is recommending approval of the resolution.
Is there a motion for item number 5?
Move to approve.
Is there a second for approval?
Second.
There's a motion and a second for approval of item number 5. Any discussion? All in favor of approving item number 5, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion is carried. City Manager, will you please read item number 6?
Yes, Mayor. Council consider a resolution authorizing the city manager to enter into an agreement with SWA Group of Houston to perform additional planning and design services related to a downtown hotel and the completion of the downtown plan, including 3D renderings of that plan. This is in order to get more information that council requested. Mr. Boone can expound up on anything else, but we're recommending approval of the resolution.
Is there a motion for item number 6?
Move to approve.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded for approval for item number 6. Any discussion? Councilman Getz?
In reviewing the 3 components of what SWA is looking at doing, the third component in which they're going to be coordinating with Garfield Public-Private in their request for a little over $9,000 to be allocated to that puzzles me a little bit, because Garfield Public-Private clearly knows everything there is to know about developing hotels in the public sector and leveraging public-private partnerships, as demonstrated by their recent openings of the Hyatt Regency in Baytown, the Hyatt Regency in Conroe, and the Doubletree Hotel up in Abilene. SWA's mission, as I understand it, is a little different. They're to develop an overall conceptual plan with, concerning downtown. And of course, before we can consider that, we really need to know, at least at a high level, how much money are we talking about? So I understand that. And it would be nice to understand what that might look like. So I understand that. That's part A and B. But this third part, where they're just going to kind of sit in on meetings, or I'm not sure what that third part is. Can you elaborate on that?
Yes, sir. So as we know, we have a downtown planning effort underway that's being shepherded through that process with the Downtown Advisory Committee, and SWA is advising us in that process. We're very near to rolling out a draft plan to the public for additional review and comments. But as you're also aware, a couple weeks ago, City Council authorized Phase 2 with Garfield to look at a hotel. Of course, Garfield, they are going to be cognizant of what's going on around them in terms of the downtown and what the future holds. But they're looking at a site specific, okay? Whereas SWA, they're looking at a lot of sites within the plan. So the idea behind what's proposed here is to ensure that SWA, our consultant on the entire downtown plan, is working closely with Garfield at a specific site to make sure they're working together. And again, as you're aware, a couple of weeks ago, Council authorized Phase 2, and part of that is Garfield presenting their ideas, their concepts to the public in a public forum, taking input in the public forum. So again, it's going to require additional time and hours of SWA to work with Garfield to make sure that both processes are properly aligned and that they're going forward together. And so, again, what we're talking about are very, very potentially extensive projects, whether you're talking about the hotel or some of the other elements going on downtown. As we know, apart from public safety and infrastructure, downtown redevelopment is high on the council's priority list. So we feel like it's important to make sure that the plans that we're looking at for the following year and beyond are properly aligned. So to take SWA out of the picture now and just let Garfield resolve the plan would probably not be the best course of action, in our opinion.
Any other comments? All in favor of approving item number 6, please signify by saying aye. Any opposed? The motion is carried. This concludes the regular agenda. Now is the time for any citizen who wishes to speak. If you would like to make public comments, by now you should have signed up using the kiosk in the back of the room. The city clerk will call your name when it is your time to speak. When you approach the podium, please state your city, your address, city, and state. We would ask that you keep your comments to 3 minutes. The green light will come on when you approach the podium, and the red light will come on when your time is up.
Addie Allen.
Good afternoon to the city manager, mayor, council. My name has been called, my address, so I don't want to take that time away from me. I am speaking to you today because I got a weed abatement notice. Don't have a problem with getting how much it cost, $138.33. Have a problem with I was not notified to tell me there was a complaint. And also, In looking in May, this was sent out June 30th. I didn't get it until July. But in May, we had the tornado. We had on thunderstorm with rain. We had a warning. And according to the Statesman in Austin, the risk of tornado damage in Beaumont is higher than average. So we had some significant rain dates in May. My man that mows for me could not get into that property. There's some other issues. My question is, who do I talk to? Because I did not get a notice, but I did get a bill, and that's not the procedure. The other thing, we did have on May 8th a tornado warning. So I don't know if you remember, it was a lot of bad weather. The other thing that I'd like to talk to you about is the evacuation plan. We had a presentation by a city staff. His information was skewed and it has not been corrected. When you have an evacuation plan, employees, like one of the councilmen told me, the labor code that I quoted was for labor. So you don't have any audible sounds for all of the employees across the city, but more than that, for the city itself. I'm just merely asking, I've gone through 3 mayors now, 2 city managers now, and nobody has given information to me to answer why we don't know what the auditable sound is or any information if a tornado or an explosion comes. Of course we know when there is something that happens with a hurricane because we get prepared, but you cannot be prepared for a tornado, but there's information that we need to know. So when will that happen? Just 2 weeks ago in Matador, outside of Dallas, 4 people were killed. We've had 3 tornadoes in Texas in July, and you can fact check me on that. Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to start with council member comments at this point, and I'm going to start on my left with Councilman Felshaw.
Thank you, Mayor. I was out of town last week and missed the council meeting. I was on vacation, but I understand that Councilman Turner was appointed as the mayor pro tem. So just want to say congratulations.
Thank you, brother.
And I hope the mayor will load you up with as many ribbon cuttings as he possibly can and keep you as busy as he possibly can. Congratulations, AJ.
Councilman Turner.
I just want to give a special shout out to everybody in the community that has been stepping up doing back to school drives. It's a beautiful thing to see these kids pull up and to see the community step up and do things to help people. I love to see that in Beaumont, Texas. I want to applaud every organization. There's so many, I can't name them. The second thing is I want to ask our attorney. We've had several individuals come to the podium and ask about the video, and I think it's extremely important that I want the citizens to know the transparency of what we're limited to do. So, Madam Attorney, can you please explain the procedures and what's going on as far as that video?
So as the gentleman stated, a request was made to Sheriff Stevens. Sheriff Stevens is an elected official for the county. As I mentioned last week, the city of Beaumont does not own or operate a jail facility, so we don't have access to their jail footage. And so the city cannot release something that we don't have in our possession. There is a process, though, for viewing videos that are connected to ongoing criminal or even civil cases. In this case, there's both. And when those requests are made, we either seek opinions from either the court or the AG. In this case, both were done, and it was decided by the Attorney General that those tapes should be withheld to allow the individual to have a fair and impartial trial.
Okay, thank you. I think it's extremely important that citizens know we are not withholding the tapes. It's actually the process that has went above our head. And I just want to make sure everybody who's came up here to speak on it didn't ignore it. I want you guys to understand why our hands are tied as far as right now with this particular situation. So I just wanted to address that. I didn't want it to fall on deaf ears, all right? And that's it.
All right, Councilman Getz.
Thank you, Mayor. We had a pretty violent weekend in Beaumont this past weekend with homicides that occurred in the West End, both in Wards 1 and Wards 2. One of the things that I want the public to understand, well, first, before I say that, I want to thank Mayor West for his comments that he put out there expressing, what the city's reaction was going to be to this. In both cases, these are instances where people reacted in a manner where cooler heads could have prevailed. They didn't, and people are dead. It's regrettable. There's a lot of guns out there, and our police do a great job. So a lot of people are out there wondering why our police department can't do more and be more proactive. It's impossible for police to be everywhere at all times, know in advance when some sort of altercation is going to ensue. It just can't be done. And so in these instances, in the first instance that happened out there on Major 105, the shooter is in custody. Bond has been set. In the second instance, the person that fired the gun will probably be brought before a grand jury, and it will be determined whether or not charges should be filed. The system works. We live in a society where there's a lot of guns and a lot of violence. Sometimes we just need to take a step back and understand that violence is not necessarily the first thing that you need to do in response to a conflict. The second point I want to talk about is I want to congratulate the Houston Astros on reacquiring Justin Verlander. So it ought to be a good rest of the baseball season. Thank you, Mayor.
Councilman Durio.
Thank you, Mayor. First, I want to, I don't know which one of the system managers I would address this to, but is there a process in place when I've been asked, citizens said, what should they do if they see people throwing trash out of the vehicle? Is that something that they can do? Can they write the license plate down and call in a 311?
So if you see someone throwing litter from a moving vehicle, obviously based on what we just discussed, you don't really want to get in an altercation with that individual, but you're welcome to write down the license plate and turn it into us. We can work with police department to see if there's some kind of complaint that can be filed. I know at one point Keep Texas Beautiful had a program where you could turn that license plate in and they would send the individual a letter reminding them not to do that. But again, if you want to write the license plate down, call it into 311, we'll be happy to look at it. But again, we don't encourage folks to interact directly.
And also, I know we have I guess there's a litter crew that goes around and picks up trash. How do they pick up this? How do they pick the locations where they pick trash up? Because I've gotten some calls and recommendations on places that needed pickup.
Yeah, there's several layers to it. So, we staff may clean up individual properties after notice has been given. The city, contract with a third party to do litter cleanups on certain key corridors throughout the city. And then if you have a dumping location or, maybe somebody is dumping in a vacant lot, again, call 311 and we can look at getting that cleaned up. Okay.
And also I want to thank the Charter Commission for the job that they did. Seemed like it was pretty well thought out. Something that's needed, and I think it's going to be very successful. I'll get it on the ballot. And also, if you get a chance, go to the city's website. Our city manager has a podcast on there. It's the first one, and I actually listened to the whole thing the other night, and you done a pretty good job, Mr. Manager. So if you get a chance, it's on the city's website, and I think that's something they're going to be doing on a regular basis. Okay, so that's a lot of good information that was put out there, and I think that's it. Hold on a minute. Oh, on the charter review, as some people ask, and you correct me if I'm wrong, Mrs. Reed, we, the council, are not supposed to advocate for this one way or the other once we decided to put it on the ballot, correct?
So the law prohibits you from using city resources to advocate for or against a ballot proposition.
Okay. So what does that mean, really? Can I say something on my city phone?
I would recommend that you not. That's a city resource. But if you were speaking at church or whatever, you would be in your own official capacity. But if you were on city business, say you were in your position as Ward 4 council member, you were there on city business and you were advocate for it against, that would probably be a gray area. You also can't use city staff to explain or to help you advocate for or against the city a proposition. So you can discuss it with citizens. Obviously, that's what you're elected to do, but I recommend that you not use city resources or facilities. So you couldn't rent out one of the civics, the Johns Library. Well, you can, like the room at the Johns Library or the community center, and then host a forum, or ask that be used for city purposes, and then do it for the purpose of educating the public to do that. So you
wouldn't be able to use it like at a neighborhood association meeting. What if folks ask you questions about it?
So answering questions isn't the same as advocating.
Okay.
But like I said, the law is it's a very, very thin line. And those neighborhood association meetings, I think they do, kind of utilize those resources, but I don't know that they're not paid for, so that the city is paying for them to do that. I believe those are rented, and at that point it becomes private. But you yourself, oh no, you're saying it's not. So then.
Not for the neighborhood meetings.
Well, then that would be a city resource.
And what about our appointees to the Charter Commission?
So appointees to the Charter Committee are different. They are not elected officials. They're not considered city resources. They're not being paid. They were volunteers, so they can obviously speak for the proposition and explain that to the public.
All right. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Councilman Felshaw?
City Attorney question, though. If you're at Rogers Park and there's a neighborhood association meeting and they ask you a question as a council member, you can't answer it, correct?
So that's what I'm saying. Answering a question isn't the same as advocating for or against. But if you start at answer the question saying, I personally think it's a good idea, you're advocating for or against. But if you're explaining, for example, how the staggered terms, something that we did here, how we want to have the at-large here and the mayor here to have a citywide election both terms, just a general information to answer the question, I would say that would not be an advocation. So it's more in your answer and less in the platform.
What if the question is, well, do you like this?
Well, then I would suggest you not answer that.
Okay.
All right. Now we'll, City Attorney, do you have any other words today?
I'd rather not. No comment.
No comment. Public Works?
Mayor, it was asked earlier about the ADA special transit system, and again, 311 can refer folks to that, but I would like to point out BeaumontTransit.com is a refreshed new website. It has good information. You can even get the application for ADA from that website.
Thank you. City Manager?
A couple of things, Mayor. I'd just like to add on what Councilmember Getz said about the violence. It's certainly a concern on my part as city manager of this city. And it's something that's going to be something that will certainly hold our attention, and as what we can do to make those conditions lessen, make us a safe city. So we will be working on things and working with the fire department and other resources as needed to do all we can to make those situations make it better for our citizens here. Councilmember Councilmember Durrell mentioned the podcasting. Thank you, Councilmember. I'd like to recognize Lauren and her staff for doing a great job, and Paige for interviewing me. So they did a fantastic job and made me feel comfortable and put me in their environment. And I think we have something that might work for the city. One of my goals is to communicate information out to the city about what's going on, directly from the source where they can get it from us. So I'm also implementing a newsletter, our city manager's newsletter, where I'll be pushing information out. This is something that we've discussed for some time now, but we're just able to get it in place. But current events, current information, things we need to share with the public, we're going to be doing that on a regular basis, and we'll be taping another one this week. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. I want to thank our media for being here, and certainly all our residents that soldier through our meetings, and our council and our staff. Dr. Shannon Allen and I had the privilege of being at One City Church this past Sunday and speaking on the opportunities at BISD for our community to get involved and to volunteer, and there are many different ways to do that. So I thank Councilman and Pastor Felshaw for that opportunity, and we will be coming to other churches in the community as well to address this, because certainly it is important. The shootings this past weekend are certainly tragic. They've been spoken of, and they were in both incidents quickly identified who the shooters were, and the police have done a marvelous job. And we as a community are certainly, as a city, looking at this. I'm going to remind everybody that is asking those questions, as I often get asked about the challenges in this city is going to get better when the community continues to do better. We have to individually show up. We have to be involved. I appreciate people here that come and express their concerns to council. We need to hear them. We need to do our best, but also within our neighborhood organizations, reminding and empowering people to use 311 and 911 when things are done. Individuals' rights are very important. And we hear comments weekly about how people's rights can be violated. But we want to do all we can as a city to ensure that until somebody breaks the law, they haven't broken the law. And so there is very little we can do to keep somebody from shooting somebody if they decide to do that. As a community, how we respond to that becomes very important. But stopping and frisking people and just randomly doing that, I think the public would be outraged, as I would be. So how that is to be identified. So certainly keep that in mind, but look individually within yourself, within the organizations you're a part of, on how we can be better to make our community safer, make our neighborhoods safer. And oftentimes when we are aware of things going on in our neighborhood, people don't report them. It gets said after the fact. Call the police. Show up to a council meeting. Call us. We get lots of concerns, and I assure you that we do our best to follow up, and I know that the police do as well. The Charter Commission, I appreciate all their work, and we have so many other commissions that work hard. I enjoyed being at the pool opening this weekend, and there were free snow cones, and it was a beautiful day, and there were lots of kids out there. And the new website really is incredible. We can't say that enough. If you hadn't checked it out, Communication did an incredible job of rolling that out. There's a lot of technology within the different departments that are now more easily located. So all the way from the streets that are currently under work, and streets that have just been repaired, and streets that are anticipated to be repaired. So be sure to check it out, because that information is there, as well as a great podcast with our city manager. And there are lots of back to school drives, which warms my heart, because I think the parents and the students know that our community is showing up for them. I think kids that need school supplies are certainly receiving them here in Beaumont, which is excellent news. And just in the first 2.5 months, and I will say with the charter that we discussed, the city manager's position, I certainly identify how important it is. And when I got here, it was hard for me to comprehend how I was going to reach out to him and get all these answers. I want to report to y'all that I'll give him an A. I reach out to him often. Sometimes many times a day, into the evening and on weekends when things are brought to me, and I find that he is quite responsive, so I realize that is a lot to manage because there's 7 of us, and we all we follow up with him as we are contacted and as we learn things, and he responds quickly and lets us know and gives us an idea of how long we're going to have to wait when there is a wait, because sometimes information isn't available. But I appreciate that, and I appreciate everybody's time, and the meeting is now adjourned.